Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of the United States Army Special Forces Command. 22,000 square miles of training grounds, barracks, classrooms, and facilities dedicated to preparing the most elite soldiers in the world. The Green Berets. The people who went where regular soldiers couldn't go, did what regular soldiers weren't trained to do, and faced conditions that tested the absolute limits of human endurance. Captain Catherine Kate Morrison was walking down the corridor of the headquarters building on a Wednesday afternoon in January. She was carrying a stack of reports. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, and her mind was focused on the meeting she was about to attend. She'd been assigned to Fort Bragg 6 months earlier as the Chief Medical Officer for the Special Forces Training Command. It was an honor and a responsibility she took seriously. Kate was 45 years old and had been serving in the Army for 23 years. She'd started as an enlisted medic, worked her way through officer candidate school, earned her medical degree while serving, and eventually risen to the rank of captain. She'd served in combat zones. She'd saved lives. She'd earned the respect of every command she'd been assigned to. But Fort Bragg was different. Fort Bragg was where the culture was most traditional, most intense, and most resistant to change. Walking toward her down the corridor was Major Derek Hammond. Derek was a decorated Special Forces officer, a career operator, and someone who'd made it clear through his words and actions that he didn't believe women belonged in Special Forces or in leadership positions over Special Forces personnel. Derek had heard through the grapevine that Kate had been assigned to oversee the medical protocols for Special Forces training. He'd expressed his displeasure to anyone who would listen. He'd made comments about lowered standards. He'd suggested that her presence would compromise the integrity of the training program. But he'd never done anything overtly disrespectful, not until that Wednesday afternoon in the corridor. Kate was walking toward the conference room when Derek stepped into her path, not accidentally, deliberately. He stood directly in front of her, blocking her ability to move forward. "Excuse me," Kate said, her voice professional and calm. Derek didn't move. Instead, he laughed. It was a harsh sound, contemptuous and deliberate. "You know what?" Derek said. "You don't belong here. You don't belong in this building. You don't belong in Special Forces Command. Special Forces is for warriors, not for people who got their medical degree in some cushy university program." Kate kept her composure. She'd dealt with prejudice before. She'd dealt with doubt. She'd dealt with men who couldn't accept that women were equally capable of serving in leadership positions. "I need to get to my meeting," Kate said, her voice still calm. "I don't care about your meeting," Derek said. "I care about the fact that someone thought it was a good idea to put a woman in charge of medical protocols for Special Forces training. That's incompetence. That's political correctness run amok." Kate stepped to the side to go around Derek. Derek stepped with her, blocking her path again. "You're in my way, Major," Kate said. "That's the point," Derek said, and he laughed again. The laugh of someone who thought he was in control, who thought he could intimidate someone with nothing but his presence and his attitude. That's when Kate heard the sound of boots, multiple people, walking quickly, purposefully down the corridor behind her. Derek's face changed. The expression shifted from contempt to something else, something like concern. He looked past Kate, and whatever he saw made him step aside immediately. Kate turned around to see what had caused the change. Behind her stood the 12-man Alpha team of the Special Forces Command. They were in tactical gear, having just come from a training exercise. They were muddy, tired, and they'd clearly heard at least part of what Derek had said. Leading the team was Chief Master Sergeant Nathan Cross. Nathan was 52 years old, had served in Special Forces for 30 years, and was considered one of the most respected operators in the entire command. He'd trained more soldiers than anyone else on base. He'd personally recruited and developed dozens of successful Special Forces operators. Nathan looked at Derek, then at Kate, then back at Derek. "Problem, sir?" Nathan asked Derek, his voice calm but with an edge underneath that suggested he already knew the answer. "No," Derek said immediately, "just having a conversation." "Didn't sound like a conversation," said Lieutenant Colonel Robert Williams, the second in command of the Alpha team. "Sounded like you were blocking an officer's path and disrespecting her service." Derek's face flushed. He looked around at the other members of the team, all of them now staring at him with expressions of quiet judgment. "I was just," Derek started. "We know what you were doing," Nathan said. He stepped forward slightly, positioning himself directly between Derek and Kate. It wasn't a threatening move. It was simply a statement, a clear message that Kate was not alone. Captain Morrison is part of this command, Nathan continued, his voice steady and authoritative. She's part of our medical team, and more importantly, she's an officer with the same rank or higher than most of you people here. So when she tells you to get out of her way, you get out of her way. Are we clear? Yes, Sergeant, Derek said quietly. I'm not finished, Nathan said. Captain Morrison has served in combat. She saved lives. She's earned every rank she has. And the fact that she's a woman doesn't change any of that. It makes her part of a long line of female warriors who have given their lives to this country. And in my command, we respect that. We respect her. Do you understand? Yes, Sergeant, Derek said again. Good, Nathan said. He stepped aside, creating a path for Kate. Captain Morrison will walk with you to your meeting. Kate nodded. She didn't say anything. She simply continued down the corridor, and behind her, the entire Alpha team, 12 combat-hardened Special Forces operators, walked with her. They weren't making a scene. They weren't being aggressive. They were simply walking her to her meeting, their presence communicating clearly that she was respected, that she was part of their unit, and that disrespecting her was disrespecting all of them. Derek watched them walk down the corridor, and he understood in that moment that he'd made a significant mistake. He'd pushed someone who had people willing to stand with her. He'd tried to intimidate someone who was stronger than he'd realized. Kate reached the conference room, turned around, and looked at the Special Forces team that had walked her there. Thank you, she said simply. No need to thank us, Nathan said. That's what we do, we take care of our own. The team dispersed, heading back to their debrief. Kate walked into her conference room and closed the door. She sat at the table, waiting for the other attendees, and allowed herself a moment to feel what she'd been suppressing. She felt violated by what Derek had done. She felt grateful for what the Special Forces team had done. But most importantly, she felt understood. She felt like part of something. She felt respected. She understood that what had happened in that corridor was about to ripple outward in ways neither she nor Derek could have anticipated. Part 2, the Command RESPONDS. By the next morning, everyone at Fort Bragg knew what had happened in the corridor. The story had spread through the barracks, through the dining facilities, through the training grounds. And the story had a very particular narrative. A major had disrespected a captain, and when the Special Forces operators found out, they'd made it clear that disrespect toward Kate Morrison wasn't acceptable. The commanding officer of Fort Bragg was a 3-star general named Patricia Morrison. Yes, Morrison. Kate and General Morrison were not related, but the coincidence had raised some eyebrows when Kate was first assigned. General Morrison had made it clear that Kate was there based on her qualifications, not her name. General Morrison called Derek into her office at 0800 hours. Sit down, Major, she said. Derek sat. I've been informed that you blocked Captain Morrison's path in the corridor yesterday and made disparaging comments about her service, General Morrison said. Is that accurate? I was expressing an opinion, Derek said. I don't care if you were reciting poetry, General Morrison said. You blocked a fellow officer's path. You made disparaging comments about her service and her assignment. That's not expressing an opinion. That's insubordination and disrespect. Derek tried to defend himself, but General Morrison cut him off. Here's what's going to happen, she said. First, you're going to apologize to Captain Morrison, verbally and in writing. Second, you're going to be reassigned to a position that doesn't involve direct supervision of medical personnel. Third, you're going to understand that your career at Fort Bragg is now marked by this incident. Every evaluation, every review, every promotion consideration will include this information. That's not fair, Derek said. You were just disrespecting a fellow officer, General Morrison interrupted. And you're going to face consequences for that, dismissed. Derek left the general's office with his head down. He understood that his standing at Fort Bragg had just significantly changed. The apology to Kate came the next day. Derek walked into her office looking uncomfortable and angry. He read from a prepared statement. I was disrespectful to you yesterday, Derek said, his voice monotone. My comments were inappropriate and did not reflect the values of the Special Forces Command. I apologize. It was a formal apology. It wasn't sincere, but it was required, and Kate accepted it with professional grace. Thank you, Major, Kate said. I appreciate the apology. After Derek left, Kate sat at her desk and thought about what had happened. She thought about what life would be like at Fort Bragg moving forward. Derek wasn't going to change his mind about women in leadership positions. The apology wouldn't convince him of anything. But what had happened was clear. His behavior had consequences. That afternoon, Nathan Cross requested a meeting with Kate. He came to her office and closed the door. I wanted to check in on you, Nathan said. Make sure you're doing okay after what happened yesterday. I'm fine, Kate said, and I want to thank you and your team for what you did. It made a difference. That's not why we did it, Nathan said. We did it because it was the right thing to do, but I'm glad it helped. Kate looked at Nathan carefully. Can I ask you something? Why did you and your team respond the way you did? Most people would have just walked past and ignored what was happening. Nathan sat down. Because I've been in special forces for 30 years, he said. And I've learned that the strongest units are the ones where people have each other's backs. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, if you're an officer or enlisted, if you're a medic or an operator. If someone disrespects one of your people, you respond. Not with anger, but with presence, with making it clear that your person is part of your unit. That's a powerful philosophy, Kate said. It's not philosophy, Nathan said. It's survival. Special Forces works because we trust each other completely. That trust doesn't happen if you allow some people to be disrespected while you stand by and do nothing. Trust happens when you make it clear that disrespecting one person is disrespecting all of you. Kate understood what Nathan was saying. She understood that what had happened in the corridor wasn't just about her. It was about the culture of the unit. It was about how Special Forces operators treated their people. Over the next few weeks, Kate found that her life at Fort Bragg had changed significantly. She was now part of a community that had her back. When she walked into the dining facility, Special Forces operators would acknowledge her. When she attended meetings, people would make space for her. When she made recommendations about medical protocols, people listened carefully and took her seriously. Derek, meanwhile, was being transferred. His new assignment was to a desk job at a base in Virginia. He'd been effectively sidelined, removed from the position of influence he'd held before the corridor incident. But Kate didn't dwell on Derek's situation. She was too busy doing her job, improving the medical training protocols, and building relationships with the Special Forces operators she was responsible for. 6 months after the corridor incident, Kate had made significant changes to the medical training program for Special Forces operators. She'd implemented new protocols for treating combat trauma. She'd created better training scenarios. She'd improved the physical fitness standards for medics based on actual operational requirements rather than arbitrary benchmarks. And the results were remarkable. The quality of Special Forces medics had improved significantly. The survival rates for wounded operators had increased. The feedback from the field was overwhelmingly positive. Nathan Cross approached Kate one day with an idea. I want to do something, he said. I want to showcase what you've done. I want to bring in the brass from higher command and show them how your innovations have improved our capabilities. That's not necessary, Kate said. I'm just doing my job. Exactly, Nathan said. You're doing your job at a level that deserves recognition. And I think it's time people understood that putting qualified people in leadership positions, regardless of their gender, makes units stronger. Kate agreed, though she was hesitant about the publicity. The demonstration took place in the training facility at Fort Bragg. High-ranking officers from various commands attended. They watched as Kate's newly trained medics responded to simulated combat scenarios with a level of skill and competence that impressed everyone in the room. After the demonstration, the commanding general of Special Operations Command approached Kate. Captain Morrison, the general said, I've reviewed your recommendations and your results. I'm going to be recommending you for promotion to major. I'm also going to be recommending that your medical protocols be implemented across all Special Forces commands. Kate felt tears threaten to form but held them back. Thank you, sir, she said. You don't need to thank me, the general said. You earned this. Your work is exceptional. And the only reason you weren't recognized earlier was because some people were too closed-minded to see what was right in front of them. The promotion came through 3 months later. Kate was now Major Catherine Morrison, the highest-ranking woman in the medical division of Special Forces Command. The news was featured in military publications. Her story was highlighted as an example of how opening doors to qualified candidates improved military readiness. But the most meaningful recognition came from the Alpha team. Nathan and his team organized a small ceremony in the dining facility. They presented Kate with a custom-made plaque that read, "To Major Catherine Morrison, for service above self, for courage in the face of doubt, for leading with integrity, you are part of our unit, always." Kate looked at the plaque, looked at the faces of the men and women who'd stood with her, and understood that she'd found something rare. She'd found a place where she was valued not for overcoming obstacles, but for her actual capabilities and character. 3 years after the corridor incident, Major Derek Hammond was being investigated. The investigation had nothing to do with his interaction with Kate. It had to do with his conduct toward other female officers and enlisted personnel at his new posting in Virginia. It turned out that Derek's disrespect toward women in uniform wasn't limited to Kate. It was a pattern. Female officers had filed multiple complaints. Female enlisted personnel had documented instances of discriminatory language and behavior. The investigation was thorough and damning. Derek had created a hostile work environment. He'd made disparaging comments about women's capabilities. He'd blocked career advancement for qualified female personnel. He'd done all of this while serving in a position of authority. Derek Hammond was discharged from the Army with a less than honorable discharge. He was removed from the military entirely. His career ended not because of one moment in a corridor, but because his behavior had finally caught up with him. Kate learned about Derek's discharge while reading a military news briefing. She felt a moment of satisfaction, but it passed quickly. She wasn't interested in Derek Hammond anymore. She was interested in her work, her career, and the unit she was part of. What was significant about Derek's discharge was that it reinforced a message throughout Special Operations Command. Disrespect toward women in uniform would not be tolerated. Not because the Army was trying to be progressive or politically correct, but because disrespect undermined unit cohesion and military readiness. Kate was invited to speak about her experience at a leadership training session for new officers. She stood in front of a room full of young men and women preparing to lead soldiers. "I want to tell you about something that happened to me early in my assignment at Fort Bragg," Kate said, and she told them the story. Not as a victim, but as a person who'd experienced disrespect and seen how a unit responds to that disrespect. "When I was blocked in that corridor," Kate said, "I could have responded with anger. I could have tried to fight back. But what actually happened was more powerful. The people I worked with responded by making it clear that disrespect toward me was disrespect toward them. That's the kind of leadership I'm asking you to provide." She looked around the room at the young officers. "If you have people in your units who are disrespecting each other, you have a problem," Kate continued. "Not a small problem, a big problem, because units that don't respect each other don't function. They don't trust each other. And in the military, trust is the difference between life and death." The speech was recorded and distributed. It became part of the training material for officers throughout Special Operations Command. Young officers were watching this woman speak about respect and leadership, and they were understanding something fundamental about their role. 7 years after the corridor incident, Major Catherine Morrison was attending a military medical conference in Washington, D.C. She was speaking on a panel about medical innovation in special operations. She was recognized as one of the leading experts in her field. She had publications, speaking engagements, and the respect of everyone in her professional community. But what she was most proud of wasn't her accomplishments. It was the women she'd helped advance. During her 7 years at Fort Bragg, Kate had mentored over 30 female military personnel. She'd helped them navigate the challenges of serving in a predominantly male environment. She'd advocated for their promotions. She'd made sure their work was recognized. Several of those women were now in leadership positions themselves. One was a major, 2 were captains, several were lieutenants. They'd all learned from Kate's example that excellence was the best response to doubt and that standing with your people was the foundation of strong leadership. After the conference, Kate received an email from someone she hadn't heard from in years, Derek Hammond. Derek was now living in Florida, working in the private sector. He'd been fired from that position as well, though the reasons were never made public. In his email, he said something that surprised Kate. "I've spent the last 7 years thinking about what happened in that corridor," Derek wrote. I've spent it regretting what I said and did. I realize now that I was wrong, not just about you, but about a lot of things. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that my disrespect cost me my career, my reputation, and a lot of the relationships I had, and I deserved all of that. I hope that you've moved forward and been able to build the life you deserve. Kate read the email and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not vindication, just a kind of sad understanding. Derek had been given exactly what he deserved, consequences for his actions. But those consequences had also destroyed his life. Kate didn't respond to the email. There was nothing to say. Derek's life was his to live now, and Kate was no longer part of it. But she filed the email away, a reminder that actions have consequences, and that the consequences of disrespect can echo across a lifetime. That night, Kate got a call from Nathan Cross. Nathan had retired from the Army the year before and was now working as a consultant for Special Operations training programs. "I wanted to check in on you," Nathan said. "Make sure you're doing okay." "I'm doing great," Kate said. "How about you?" "Good," Nathan said. "I'm working on some new training protocols. Actually, I was thinking about the work we did together at Fort Bragg. Some of the best work I've ever been part of." "That's kind of you to say," Kate said. "It's not kindness," Nathan said. "It's truth. You came to Fort Bragg and changed the culture. You made us understand that respect for the people we serve with makes us stronger. That lesson stuck. People are still talking about it." After the call ended, Kate thought about what Nathan had said. She'd come to Fort Bragg expecting to do a job. Instead, she'd been part of something larger. She'd been part of changing a culture. She'd been part of building an organization where people understood that their strength came from respecting each other, not from dominating each other. 2 years later, Kate was promoted to lieutenant colonel. She was now the deputy commander of the Medical Division of Special Operations Command. She was responsible for training programs across multiple bases. She was shaping the future of military medicine in special operations. But the promotion that meant the most to her came from an unexpected source. The United States Army announced that Kate had been selected to receive the Meritorious Service Medal. The citation didn't just mention her medical innovations, though it did. It mentioned her leadership. It mentioned her impact on organizational culture. It mentioned her role in advancing women in the military. At the ceremony, General Patricia Morrison presented the medal to Kate. "Major Morrison," General Morrison said, and Kate smiled at the coincidence of the shared last name. "You've exemplified what it means to serve with honor and integrity. You've faced disrespect and responded with excellence. You've mentored the next generation of military leaders, and you've changed the culture of special operations for the better. Thank you for your service." Kate stood at attention as the general pinned the medal to her uniform. And in that moment, she thought about that day in the corridor 7 years ago. She thought about Derek Hammond blocking her path. She thought about her rage and hurt at being disrespected. She thought about Nathan and his team walking her to her meeting. That moment had been a turning point, but not because it had been devastating. It had been a turning point because it had shown her what solidarity looked like. It had shown her that she wasn't alone. It had shown her that people were willing to stand with her based on her character and her service. And that knowledge had given her the strength to not just survive in an organization that was sometimes hostile to her presence, but to thrive, to excel, to change the culture from the inside. That night, Kate attended a reception where she was honored for her medal. The room was full of military personnel, civilian staff, and family members. As she circulated through the room, she was approached by a young woman in uniform. The woman was a second lieutenant, newly assigned to Fort Bragg. "Major Morrison," the woman said, "I wanted to tell you that I read about what happened to you in that corridor, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" Kate asked. "For showing me that it was possible to move forward," the woman said. "I've had some rough experiences in the military because of my gender. Reading your story, seeing how you responded with excellence instead of bitterness, it gave me hope that I could do the same." Kate hugged the young woman and felt tears in her eyes. This was the legacy. This was what it was all about, not her promotions or her medals or her accomplishments, but the fact that her example was helping other women navigate their own challenges, that her strength was giving strength to others. 3 years after the medal ceremony, Kate was approaching the end of her military service. She'd been in the Army for 26 years, and it was time to move on to the next chapter. She could have taken a civilian consulting position with a defense contractor. Several companies had approached her. Instead, she decided to teach. She accepted a position as a professor of military medicine at a prestigious medical school. She would spend her time training the next generation of military medical personnel. She would share her knowledge, her experience, and most importantly, her understanding of what it meant to serve with integrity. On her last day at Fort Bragg, Nathan Cross came to see her off. They stood in Kate's office as she packed up the last of her personal items. "You're going to change lives," Nathan said, "just like you changed things here." "I hope so," Kate said. "I want to make sure that what I've learned gets passed on, that the lessons about respect and leadership get passed on." "They will," Nathan said. "Because you're the kind of person who actually lives those lessons. You don't just talk about them, you do them." Kate drove away from Fort Bragg on a warm June morning. She looked in her rearview mirror at the base where she'd spent 7 transformative years. She thought about Derek Hammond blocking her path. She thought about the moment when her world had been a little bit harder. And she thought about how that moment had ultimately led to her becoming who she was meant to be. Sometimes, Kate understood, the worst moments of our lives become the catalyst for the best. Sometimes, being disrespected by the right person at the right time teaches us something we need to know. And sometimes, having people stand with us in those moments gives us the strength to stand on our own for all the moments that follow. That was her legacy, not the medals or the promotions, but the understanding that strength comes from standing together. That respect is something we earn through integrity. That serving with excellence is the best response to doubt. And that understanding would continue to ripple outward, affecting everyone she taught, everyone she mentored, and everyone who heard her story and decided that they could do the same.